Good evening, people. So, if you watched my last video, you'll know that I've been having some technical issues. Basically, my laptop that I usually use, the smaller one, is having chronic space problems. I've tried deleting files, I've tried storage sense, I've tried disk clean, I've tried everything that I can think of, and it just won't free space. It just keeps coming back like it's almost full. Which obviously is slowing down the system. It's very frustrating. I think I've got some sort of virus. Usually in that situation, I would basically reboot the system, which is relatively straightforward once you've done it once. It's relatively straightforward to do, and I've managed to do it on this bigger laptop. So thank goodness I've got at least one laptop. But anyway, that's the situation. Um, The flip side is that it takes a lot longer to upload on this laptop. I can record videos, but it takes hours to upload, whereas on the smaller one, it's basically instantaneous. So that's kind of the price that I have to pay, but it's okay. I think it's important to maintain the channel, and there are things I want to speak about. And this particular issue, I think, is important. Um, it's actually about what may rank as one of Britain's worst miscarriages of justice. I mean, every miscarriage of justice is bad, but in terms of the length of time this person has served, it's appalling. I'm talking about the Andrew Malkinson case in Greater Manchester. This has been reported in numerous news sites. So, for the purpose of this, I'm going to use Greater Manchester, or the Manchester Evening News, excuse me, and the reports by Adam Maidment. So I've actually got it on the screen of my other laptop, but honestly, that's so unreliable right now that it might stick. So I'm actually going to read from my phone as well. Like I said, it's been reported in numerous sources, but I'll just stick to this one for now. The reports by Adam Maidment. So Andrew Malkinson has spoken of the unspeakable pain and misery he has suffered after spending 17 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. As always, I'll read this out then, share some of my thoughts on this. The 57-year-old was wrongly jailed for a violent rape on a woman by the M61 motorway in Little Hulton in July 2003. I don't know if that's pronounced Hulton or Hulton. His conviction was overturned by senior judges at the Court of Appeal on Wednesday after DNA evidence linked another man to the crime. Now, in 2003, there was DNA, so we're not talking about, a time when the technology didn't exist. Speaking to Good Morning Britain on Friday about Wednesday's decision, Mr. Malkinson said it was really joyful. It wasn't really joyful. It was more relief. It's been hard to cope with. Although I won finally, they still stole all of those years from me and filled it with misery and joylessness. No happiness. It's a black hole. Following the Court of Appeal's decision, Greater Manchester Police issued a statement apologising to Mr. Malkinson. Assistant Chief Constable Sarah Jackson said, "Whilst we hope this outcome gives him a long overdue sense of justice, we acknowledge that it does not return the years he has lost." The ACC also offered to meet with Mr. Malkinson in person to deliver the force's apology. Speaking to the ITV daytime show, he said he did not want to meet anyone at this stage. "Right now, I don't feel like that at all," he told reporter Liz Summers. "I don't feel like meeting anyone from that institution. They have caused me unspeakable pain and misery, oceans of pain, and the idea of them apologising is very hollow." Just asking me to continue reading here. Um, Describing what happened to him as totally catastrophic, Mr. Malkinson said, "I once had hopes and dreams. Then it just happened. It's like being caught in a tsunami, I suppose. I saw the 2004 tsunami on the TV. Excuse me, some ads are coming up on my phone. So I saw the 2004 tsunami on the TV in prison soon after I was convicted, and that's how I felt. I mean, that's how far back this goes. I remember the tsunami. I was 19 at the time. I'm 37 now. Um, Calling for change, he added, "You're a small piece of detritus that gets dragged by immense forces. The state wields immense power. It needs to be tempered. And I was just dragged, plucked from my existence into a world of living hell. It's difficult to make that understand. And obviously in prison, no relationships. I couldn't have a family. Who knows? You can never predict how your life might have been, might have gone had it not been hijacked. I could have met the woman of my dreams. I could have had a family. I always wanted to have a daughter at some point, but I don't think that's ever going to happen now. He said he plans to leave the country and go travelling now that he has been exonerated. However, it was recently reported that he may be forced to pay thousands in prison costs. This is a travesty, covering food and accommodation during his time in jail. Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper said this morning that she felt it would not be appropriate for Mr. Malkinson to be penalised any further, and hoped an independent process into his jail fees would take into consideration his situation. This bloody system it's outrageous. He's having to face more bureaucracy. I'll come back to that point because Rishi Sunak has also criticised it. Well, actually, that's the end of the report. There's a lot of other sources for this, a lot of other reports from various angles of this case. Greater Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham has also expressed his concern about this. The Prime Minister has said he shouldn't pay this back. Our damn legal establishment should not be punishing this man any further. It's a travesty that people who have been found to be innocent, exonerated in cases of miscarriages of justice. And whilst this is one of the worst, it's not the only example, that they have to pay back time for board and bed, or rather that gets deducted from any payment they may receive. It's a disgrace, an absolute disgrace. And I think it damns the bureaucracy of our legal system. I mean, Cooper's talking about an independent review. That's probably the formal process. But my God, this man has spent 17 years of his life in jail for a crime he did not commit. And actually, the time's longer than that. That's the time in jail. I would say it's longer when you factor in, the trial and all of that. That would have been a period of great anxiety. That would have been taken away from him. 2003, we're actually talking 20 years here. He was released, I believe, a couple of years ago, but only now is he getting, are the wheels turning for his exoneration. It's an absolute disgrace. I mean, if something good comes out of this case, if nothing else, it should be an end to this absolute perverse, disgusting travesty of punishing people further by deducting the. It's not necessarily that he's being charged for it, but it's being deducted from the compensation he would get, which could be up to £1 million, I believe. Sounds like a lot of money, but when you factor in, 17 years, who knows what sort of job he could have had? I'm not sure what he'd done before, but there's jobs nowadays that if you rise up the ladder, you can get quite a lot of money. He could easily have got £1 million in that period, cumulatively speaking. But there's a number of things to think about with a case like this. Firstly, the apology. I don't blame him for shunning them. I mean, this idea that, they've inflicted this on him. Oh, well, an apology. And we know it won't take the years back, but we're doing it for a formality. It's not good enough. It's really not, because mistakes would have been made. Why? Why was DNA evidence ignored in his trial? This seems absurd. I mean, we're not talking about the 1950s. We're talking about the 2000s, 21st century. Sometimes you'd sort of think this sort of thing, well, oh, it's something that happened in the past. But this entire case happened within the 21st century. The crime, the miscarriage of justice, the exoneration, it's all happened in the time frame of this century. Now, I'm a conservative on crime. I've long argued actually there should be tougher sentences, particularly for certain crimes. I came across a case the other night while it was reported on the news. A drink driver had rammed a police car. The officer suffered severe whiplash. It was an egregious, act of reckless driving. He actually rammed the police vehicle, and then he went down the wrong way on a dual carriageway. He got 30 months. That's 2.5 years for endangering lives. You know, and no doubt he'll get his license back, or he won't get a lifetime driving ban. So you look at a case like that, and obviously rape's also a serious crime. I'm not saying it isn't, but there's something very, very wrong with our justice system. Um, Where people who are clearly guilty, in that case, there's no doubt about it. He gets, 2.5 years. It's better than nothing. But for endangering lives, I don't know. I think that's light enough. And in a case where evidence was ignored, man finally gets exonerated. But this disgusting travesty that he has to pay, part of his compensation in board and bed. I think if the judicial establishment ignores the Shadow Home Secretary, the Prime Minister, Sunak said it's unfair, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, three prominent politicians, if they're all ignored, what does that say about our justice establishment? What does it say about its arrogance and its inability to change? I mean, I can't even begin to process what one day in prison for something you haven't done wrong would be like. I covered a case recently where a woman was held by, well, it was in Metropolitan Police jurisdiction, but they later said it was Lincolnshire Police arrested her because they were brought in. This was during the coronation. And she was held all day on suspicion of being a Just Stop Oil protester, and she wasn't. She was totally innocent. But she was held all day, right? If she was innocent. Then that's one day. One day. I can imagine the stress that caused. That's one day. This guy, almost 2 decades. I can't even begin to process that. I imagine that he's been out for a few years now, but I imagine that he'd have PTSD. I would imagine that he has severe social anxiety. And remember the nature of the crime as well. That's another factor in all of this. Rape is one of the most heinous crimes. So, crimes against women and children in prison, that's like the lowest of the low. So not only was he, serving time for a crime he didn't commit, he was one of those sort of inmates who would be more vulnerable because other inmates would no doubt target him. I haven't read anything so far that he was attacked in prison, but I wouldn't be surprised if it happened. I mean, can you imagine a worse nightmare? You're serving time for a crime you didn't commit, and then you're vilified and you're, attacked by other inmates. It's absolutely horrendous. And I think it shows the strength of this man's character that he didn't basically go over the edge. But he's now campaigning for this to change, and I really, really hope he's successful. If nothing changes from this case, he's right. The apology is hollow. Greater Manchester Police is not good enough to say sorry. They have to look at what they done wrong. Why did they push for this man to be facing trial? Why did they arrest him? Something similar happened with Northumbria Police. Recently, we had a high profile case. Basically, a little girl was murdered in 1993. It was a very notorious case. Her name was Nikki Allen. If you look up Google, you'll find more information on this. But suffice to say, an innocent man had initially been arrested for that and actually stood trial. Now, I don't think he actually went to prison, so it wasn't like this where there was a long prison term. But that was enough to ruin his life. He was vilified, he was targeted. This year, the guilty man has finally been apprehended. Finally, after 30 years. And the little girl's mother in that case, again, she said the apology from the police was hollow. Now, I accept that police can make mistakes, so it's not always malicious. But I also think it has to be said that there are corrupt practices in the police. And, in order to secure a conviction, in order to perhaps pander to public pressure, they will sometimes cut corners. I believe that. And I believe that in miscarriages of justice, you can't think, it's hard to see it any other way. So an apology is meaningless unless there's change. It really is, because then it will just happen to someone else. Now, he's been in prison for, I think he was 39 at the time. Well, let's see, 2003, 57 now. He would have been 37, in fact, my age. Um, I can imagine if my life is taken away now. I'm still a young man. So it's horrendous. All I can hope is that if he does travel, he can find some sort of. I don't think something like that. I don't think you can ever get over it. That void will always be there. But I hope he can find some joy in his life. I hope he can. 57 is it's older, but it's. I hope he can find some light. I hope he can find a kind woman who will, be there for him. I hope he can And with a daughter, maybe he can adopt. Maybe there's options there, but that's probably naive of me to say, because even being cleared, there will be some people out there who will still doubt him. It's horrendous. It's horrendous. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this up because this will probably take a long time to upload. I'll put a link to this report. Like I say, this particular case. Andrew Malkinson is there's a lot of sources for it, so I've just happened to read out this one. Um, there have been other high-profile miscarriages of justice in British judicial history. Um, in Bradford, there was Stefan Kitchko case, and there's been others. There's been others where maybe someone was executed and then posthumously pardoned. That was like the Derek Bentley case in 1953. But there's been others. But I don't blame him for not wanting to make Greater Manchester Police, because he probably. I don't blame him. I mean, and they have to understand that they have taken away 17 years of his life. Not just them, the presiding judge. He or she shouldn't get off the hook either, because he or she had the responsibility to look at all of the evidence and didn't. In fact, the presiding judge should be facing questions. Why did they ignore key evidence? Or why was that key evidence not presented? The thing about a case like this, I mean, people can say it's awful, but it's just a one-off. The problem is it isn't. We have had other high-profile miscarriages of justice, and one is one too many. So, it's a worn-out cliche, but lessons have to be learned. What mistakes were made? What can stop those mistakes happening again? And bear in mind, 2003, we're not talking about a very, very, very long time ago. DNA existed, the technology existed. Why did this happen? But if anything good comes out of this case, I hope this disgraceful policy of making the wrongfully condemned pay part of their board. That is adding insult to injury. It's a disgrace, and it shames our justice system. Now, having said that, none of this takes away the fact that there are guilty criminals out there. And there was another innocent party in this, the woman who got raped, and she also deserves justice. Um, and in a sense, justice was robbed from her because the actual rapist went free. So, although this is primarily about the innocent man who spent time in prison, she was also denied justice because her attacker got away with it. So, that's the other factor. I do believe in punishing the guilty, but the evidence must be solid. Let me know your thoughts. I just hope this man can get some peace in his life. 57, it's not for me to say he's still young. I think that is still young, but when you've had such a big chunk of your life taken away, it's how do you process that? I know in the Stefan Kitchko case, he couldn't cope. Even though he was free for a few years, he couldn't cope. I just hope this man has the strength of character to find a way to make some meaning in his life. Um, and maybe he can use his experience to help others, then something positive can come out of this. By the looks of it, he is doing that. I've seen him um, sort of campaigning for the wrongfully convicted, so huge respect to this man to turn his own tragedy into something productive. It's appalling. And it shames Greater Manchester Police, and it shames our justice establishment. It really does. And like I say, I'll just close with this: if they ignore three senior politicians and don't change, it shows just how rotten and corrupt our legal establishment is. I'll leave it there.